Tonight we unlock a vault that was never meant to be opened. Not a vault of gold or silver, but something far more dangerous to those who control the narrative of human progress. Hidden beneath the marble floors of Vatican City lies evidence of technology so advanced it would rewrite everything you think you know about our ancestors. For over a century, the Catholic Church has maintained one of the most sophisticated cover-up operations in history. Not about scandals or corruption, but about knowledge. Ancient knowledge that proves humanity once possessed technology that makes our modern world look primitive. Technology that could solve our energy crisis overnight. Devices that could revolutionize medicine, transportation, and communication. Blueprints that could unlock the secrets of consciousness itself. But here's the terrifying truth. They've had it all along. While we struggle with fossil fuels, they know about energy sources that never run out. While we watch loved ones suffer from diseases, they possess healing technologies that work at the cellular level. While we dream of space travel, they understand propulsion systems that defy everything we call physics. This isn't speculation. This isn't theory. This is testimony from those who walked the halls, opened the forbidden files, and saw what humanity was never supposed to remember. Because if you knew what they've been hiding, if you understood what we were capable of before the Great Forgetting, you would never look at authority the same way again. Like this video, subscribe, because tonight we're going where no documentary has dared to go. Into the secret chambers where ancient meets impossible, where the past holds the keys to a future they don't want us to have. The tremor in his hands hadn't stopped for 3 days. Dr. Marcus Whitfield sat in the small cafe in Rome, his coffee growing cold as he stared at the photographs hidden inside his jacket. He had spent 15 years as a Vatican archivist, 15 years believing he was preserving religious history. He had been wrong, terribly, dangerously wrong. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Marcus arrived at the Vatican Secret Archives at 6 a.m., just as he had every day since 2008. The archives, despite their name, weren't truly secret anymore, just restricted. Scholars with proper credentials could access most of the 35 million documents housed in the 53-mile labyrinth of shelves. But Marcus had clearance that went deeper than most. He worked in Section 47, the area that dealt with what the Vatican called anomalous artifacts. Most people assumed this meant religious relics of questionable authenticity. Pieces of the true cross, fragments of saints' bones, items that might embarrass the church if they were proven fake. Marcus had thought the same thing, until the morning Monsignor Toretti handed him a key he'd never seen before. "There's been a leak in the sub-basement," Toretti said, his Italian accent thick with something Marcus couldn't identify at first. Later, he would recognize it as fear. Storage room X7 needs to be documented before the restoration crew arrives. Everything must be catalogued. Everything. But Marcus, the Monsignor gripped his arm, what you see down there never leaves that room. Do you understand? Marcus nodded, though he didn't understand. Not yet. He took the key, a heavy brass thing that looked ancient, and made his way to the elevator that descended below the official sub-basement. He'd heard rumors of deeper levels, but in 15 years he'd never seen them. The elevator shuddered as it dropped past floors that weren't marked on any blueprint. When it finally stopped, Marcus found himself in a corridor lit by fluorescent bulbs that hummed against walls of medieval stone. The air smelled different here, not just old, but electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Room X7 was behind a door that required 3 different keys. The brass one from Toretti, a magnetic card, and a biometric scanner that read his fingerprint. For a simple storage room, the security seemed excessive. When the locks finally disengaged, Marcus stepped into a space that defied everything he thought he knew about history. The room was vast, carved from solid rock, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into darkness above industrial lighting. But it wasn't the architecture that stopped his breathing. It was what filled the space. Dozens of glass display cases lined the walls and formed aisles throughout the room. Each case contained objects that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie rather than a religious archive. Got in the first case, a crystalline device the size of a human skull pulsed with internal light. No visible power source, no wires, yet it glowed with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The placard read, Origin, Alexandria Library Recovery, 1462. Function, unknown. Warning, do not remove from containment. The next case held what appeared to be a metallic sphere, perfectly smooth, hovering 3 inches above its base without any visible means of support. Anti-gravity, Marcus thought, and immediately felt foolish. Anti-gravity was theoretical physics, not something you found in a church basement. Yet there it was, rotating slowly, defying the fundamental law that keeps our feet on the ground. As Marcus moved deeper into the room, the objects became more disturbing. A series of tablets covered in symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. A device that looked like a sophisticated computer, though its construction appeared to be made from materials that didn't exist in any periodic table he knew. Most unsettling was a collection of what could only be described as blueprints. Technical drawings of machines and structures that were simultaneously ancient and futuristic. The water leak Toretti mentioned was real but minor. A thin stream running down one wall had damaged some of the storage containers in the back corner of the room. As Marcus approached to assess the damage, he noticed something that made his hands shake for the first time that day. The leaked water was flowing upward along the wall, defying gravity, forming intricate patterns before disappearing into tiny holes in the stone ceiling. This wasn't normal water. This was something else entirely. Marcus pulled out his camera, a violation of protocol, but his scientific training overrode his institutional loyalty. He had to document this. As he photographed the anti-gravity water, he noticed a detail that stopped him cold. The patterns the liquid formed weren't random. They were mathematical. Fibonacci sequences, sacred geometry, fractals that seemed to encode information he couldn't understand but somehow recognized. That's when he saw the book, hidden behind one of the damaged containers, partially concealed by debris, was a leather-bound volume that had somehow escaped the cataloging system. Marcus opened it carefully, expecting Latin or ancient Greek. Instead, he found pages covered with detailed technical diagrams, mathematical formulas that were centuries ahead of their time, and text written in a language he'd never seen but could somehow read. The first page sent ice through his veins. The suppression protocol, maintaining technological regression through controlled historical narrative. Authorized by Papal Bull 1487, updated 1952, 1973, 2001. As Marcus read, the truth began to crystallize. This wasn't just a storage room for religious artifacts. This was a repository for suppressed human technology. Ancient devices that proved our ancestors were far more advanced than any history book dared admit. And according to the manual he held, the Vatican had been systematically hiding, acquiring and suppressing advanced technology for over 500 years. The book detailed case after case. The real reason the Library of Alexandria was burned. The truth about what the Templars discovered in Solomon's Temple. The archaeological finds that never made it to museums because they contradicted the carefully maintained timeline of human development. Page after page of evidence that humanity had reached incredible heights of technological achievement, only to be forced backward into an artificial dark age. But why? Why would the Vatican, an institution supposedly dedicated to truth and enlightenment, participate in keeping humanity ignorant? The answer was in the final section of the manual, Control Through Limitation. A technologically advanced populace requires neither salvation nor guidance. Regression ensures dependence. Dependence ensures authority. Marcus photographed every page, his hands now shaking so violently he could barely hold the camera steady. As he worked, he began to understand the scope of what he was seeing. This wasn't just about hiding a few unusual artifacts. This was evidence of a conspiracy that spanned centuries, involving not just the Vatican, but governments, universities, and media organizations worldwide. A coordinated effort to keep humanity from remembering what it once was and what it could become again. When he finally finished documenting the book, Marcus carefully returned it to its hiding place and completed his assigned task of cataloging the water damage. But as he prepared to leave, he made a decision that would change his life forever. Hidden in his jacket were memory cards containing evidence that could shake the foundations of human civilization. 3 days later, sitting in that cafe in Rome, Marcus knew he was being watched. Men in dark suits had been following him since he left his apartment that morning. His phone had been disconnected. His Vatican access card had been deactivated. But the evidence was already uploaded to secure servers in 3 different countries, with instructions for release if anything happened to him. The question wasn't whether he would expose what he'd found. The question was whether anyone would believe it, and whether he would live long enough to find out. As Marcus finished his cold coffee and prepared to disappear into the crowded streets of Rome, he thought about the anti-gravity water still flowing upward in that hidden room beneath the Vatican. Technology that could revolutionize the world, reduced to a curiosity locked away in the dark. How many other solutions to humanity's problems were gathering dust in secret vaults while people suffered from problems that had already been solved centuries ago? The answer to that question would take him into a world of suppressed science, murdered inventors, an ancient technology so advanced it would make our smartphones look like stone tools. But first, he had to survive long enough to tell the story. Marcus had seen enough in room X7 to know that everything he'd been taught about human history was a lie. But it wasn't until he accessed the Vatican's classified database from his hotel room that he understood the true scope of what was being hidden from humanity. Using credentials he'd memorized from Monsignor Toretti's computer, he logged into files that weren't supposed to exist. The database was called Technological Suppression Archive, and it contained detailed reports on thousands of devices, blueprints, and discoveries that had been acquired, studied, and hidden over the past 5 centuries. Each entry included photographs, technical specifications, and most chilling of all, neutralization reports detailing what had been done to the inventors. The first file that caught his attention was labeled 0-point energy, extraction, Tesla variant. The photographs showed a device that looked like a metallic tower about 3 feet tall, covered in copper coils and crystalline structures. According to the technical specifications, this machine could extract unlimited energy from what physicists call the quantum vacuum, the space between atoms that most people think is empty but actually seethes with invisible energy. The report was dated 1943 and included a handwritten note. Device acquired from Tesla estate immediately following subject's death. Produces 47.3 kilowatts continuously without external power source. Theoretical output scalable to industrial levels. Recommend immediate suppression under Protocol 7. Public release would destabilize entire energy sector within 18 months. Marcus stared at the screen. Unlimited free energy had been possible since 1943, while the world spent the next 80 years fighting wars over oil and watching people die from pollution-related diseases. The Vatican had been sitting on technology that could have solved everything. He scrolled to the next entry. Vibrational healing matrix. Rife. Frequency generator. The device looked like a cross between a microscope and a radio transmitter. Dr. Royal Rife had discovered that specific electromagnetic frequencies could destroy cancer cells, bacteria, and viruses without harming healthy tissue. The Vatican report noted, subject achieved 100% cure rate in terminal cancer patients during 1934 trials. Device capable of treating virtually all known diseases through targeted frequency resonance. Recommend immediate acquisition of all prototypes and research materials. Neutralization report was brutal in its efficiency. Rife's laboratory was burned down in 1939. His equipment was destroyed. He was arrested multiple times on fabricated charges. Medical authorities were pressured to denounce his work as quackery. By 1950, Royal Rife had been reduced to alcoholism and obscurity, his revolutionary discoveries buried so completely that most people had never heard his name, but the Vatican had kept his machines. They worked. Marcus found test reports from the 1960s confirming that Rife's frequencies could indeed cure cancer, AIDS, and dozens of other diseases. While millions of people suffered and died from illnesses that were easily treatable, the cure sat locked away in a basement beneath Rome. The pattern was everywhere. Inventor after inventor, discovery after discovery, all quietly acquired and suppressed. Victor Schauberger's implosion engines that could generate massive power from water and air. Wilhelm Reich's orgone accumulators that could manipulate, wither, and heal psychological. TRUM, a to Henry Morey's radiant energy detector that pulled electricity directly from cosmic radiation. Each file told the same story. Brilliant scientists made breakthroughs that could transform civilization. They were approached by representatives offering to fund their research or buy their patents. If they refused, they faced harassment, imprisonment, or worse. If they cooperated, their technology disappeared into classified vaults while they were paid handsomely to remain silent or redirect their work toward approved applications. Marcus found records of at least 30 inventors who had died under suspicious circumstances after refusing to surrender their discoveries. Car accidents that defied physics, heart attacks in healthy 30-year-olds, suicides by researchers who had just achieved their life's work. The Vatican files didn't explicitly claim credit for these deaths, but the timing was too consistent to be coincidental. One entry made his blood run cold. It was labeled Gravitic Manipulation Device, Hutchison Effect Generator. John Hutchison, a Canadian inventor, had discovered how to manipulate gravity using specific electromagnetic frequencies. His experiments had levitated heavy objects, transmuted metals, and even made solid matter partially transparent. The implications were staggering: anti-gravity flight, unlimited materials science, possibly even dimensional travel. The Vatican report noted. Subject's research directly threatens fundamental control mechanisms. Gravitic manipulation would eliminate transportation monopolies, mining industries, and construction limitations. Population mobility would become impossible to regulate. Recommend immediate neutralization under Protocol 12. Marcus searched for Protocol 12. The file was heavily redacted, but the sections he could read described permanent solution methods for inventors whose work posed civilization-level threats. It read like an assassination, manual disguised as bureaucratic procedure. But why? Why would an institution supposedly dedicated to serving humanity spend centuries suppressing technologies that could end suffering, poverty, and environmental destruction? The answer was in a file labeled Theological Implications of Advanced Technology. The document was a theological analysis written in 1962 by a committee of Vatican scholars. Their conclusion was chilling. Technological advancement beyond current parameters would eliminate humanity's dependence on both secular and religious authority structures. Free energy removes economic control. Healing frequency eliminates medical control. Gravitic manipulation removes geographical control. Advanced consciousness research removes spiritual control. Total technological liberation would result in the obsolescence of all institutions currently managing human affairs. They weren't just suppressing technology. They were suppressing human potential itself. Every breakthrough that could make people more independent, healthier, or more capable of exploring reality on their own terms was seen as a threat to institutional power. The Vatican, working with governments and corporations, had essentially decided that humanity wasn't ready for the technology it had already invented. Marcus discovered that the suppression network extended far beyond the Catholic Church. The database contained communication records with organizations like the Smithsonian Institution, which had reportedly hidden archaeological evidence of advanced ancient civilizations. The Patent Office, which routinely classified breakthrough inventions under national security provisions. Major universities, which steered research away from promising but problematic directions. Even more disturbing were the records of active disinformation campaigns. When suppression wasn't enough, they would flood the market with fake versions of real technology, discrediting the entire field through association with obvious frauds. They would fund debunkers to attack legitimate researchers, pay media outlets to ridicule breakthrough discoveries, and create controlled opposition groups that led truth seekers away from real information toward manufactured dead ends. The scope was breathtaking. For over a century, Human technological development had been artificially constrained by a coordinated effort to maintain scarcity, dependence, and ignorance. While people struggled with energy bills, the technology for free power sat in vaults. While loved ones died from diseases, the cures gathered dust in secret laboratories. While humanity remained trapped on a single planet, the keys to the stars were locked away by those who preferred earthbound subjects to cosmic citizens. Marcus found himself looking at photographs of devices that seemed almost magical, but were accompanied by rigorous scientific documentation proving they worked. A machine that could transmute lead into gold by restructuring atomic bonds. A device that generated perfect weather in a localized area. A consciousness interface that allowed direct human-computer integration. Technologies that would revolutionize every aspect of human existence, reduced to curiosities in a hidden museum. The final entry he examined was labeled Ancient Technology Recovery, Gizeh Pyramid Complex. The file contained photographs of chambers beneath the Great Pyramid that weren't supposed to exist according to mainstream archaeology. These hidden rooms housed devices that were clearly not built by Bronze Age civilizations. Crystalline power generators that were still functional after thousands of years. Stone computers that stored vast amounts of information in quantum crystalline matrices. Levitation platforms that could move massive stone blocks as easily as lifting feathers. The report suggested that ancient civilizations had achieved technological levels that made modern science look primitive, but had been destroyed or forgotten during various cataclysms. The survivors had hidden their most advanced technologies in secret locations, protected by elaborate security systems and cryptic clues. The Vatican had been systematically locating and looting these sites for centuries, adding ancient super technology to their suppression archive. As Marcus closed the files and prepared to leave his hotel room, he realized that room X7 wasn't just a storage facility. It was a prison for human potential. Every device in that chamber represented a solution to problems that still plagued mankind. Clean energy, perfect health, unlimited resources, expanded consciousness. It was all there, waiting behind locked doors while the world suffered from artificial scarcity. But Marcus had seen something else in those files, something that gave him hope. Recent entries suggested that the suppression network was losing control. Too many people were independently rediscovering suppressed technologies. The internet was making information harder to contain. Whistleblowers were emerging from within the system itself. The question was no longer whether these technologies would be revealed. The question was whether humanity would survive the transition when they were. The first sign that Marcus was being actively pursued came at 3:47 a.m., when his hotel room door exploded inward. He had been expecting it. The Vatican's response time was legendary among those who knew their methods. What he hadn't expected was that they would send the custodes silenti, the guardians of silence. Marcus rolled off his bed as three figures in dark tactical gear swept into the room. He had prepared for this moment, sleeping fully clothed with his escape pack ready. As suppressor-equipped weapons whispered death past his head, he triggered the smoke grenades he'd positioned around the room and dove. Through the bathroom window he'd pre-weakened hours earlier. The 4-story drop into the alley should have killed him. Instead, he landed on a pile of construction sand he'd arranged below, rolled to absorb the impact, and sprinted toward the motorcycle he'd stolen and modified that afternoon. Behind him, he could hear the distinctive crack of Vatican security forces rappelling down the building's exterior. Custodes Silenti weren't ordinary Vatican security. They were the church's most classified operative division, established in 1823 specifically to handle technological containment scenarios. Their members were recruited from elite military units, conditioned through years of psychological programming, and equipped with technology that the public wouldn't see for decades. They had one directive: eliminate threats to the suppression protocol by any means necessary. As Marcus tore through the narrow streets of Rome on his motorcycle, he accessed the encrypted files he'd uploaded to dead-drop servers around the world. If he didn't check in every 6 hours, the information would automatically release to journalists, scientists, and activists in 27 countries. It was his insurance policy, but he knew it wouldn't protect him for long. The Vatican had been perfecting the art of making problems disappear for over 5 centuries. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from someone using the codename Prometheus. The text was brief: train station, platform 7, 15 minutes. Come alone or burn alone. Marcus had been hoping for this contact. During his research into the suppression network, he'd found references to an underground resistance movement of scientists, inventors, and Vatican insiders who were working to expose the truth about hidden technologies. They called themselves the Custodes Veritatis, the guardians of truth. If they were real, they might be his only chance of survival. Platform 7 at Roma. Termini was crowded, even at 4 a.m. Marcus spotted his contact immediately, a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. She was reading a newspaper with the headline visible: Prominent Vatican Archivist Dies in Hotel Fire. They were already writing his obituary. Dr. Whitfield. I presume, she said without looking up. I am Dr. Elena Vasquez, formerly of CERN, currently persona non grata in 17 countries. Walk with me. As they moved through the station, Dr. Vasquez explained the situation. The Custodes Silenti have standing orders to eliminate anyone who accesses the X7 archive without authorization. You've seen approximately 0.3% of what they're hiding. The question is whether you're prepared to see the rest, because once you do, there's no going back to your comfortable ignorance. She led into a maintenance area beneath the station, through a door marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Sacred geometry, she explained. The ancients understood that certain mathematical relationships could affect consciousness. The Vatican uses these symbols as psychological barriers. Your mind literally doesn't. What to process, what they protect. The tunnel beyond the door was older than the railway station above it, carved from volcanic rock and lined with stones that seemed to emit their own faint light. This passage dates back to the Roman Empire, Dr. Vasquez said. But the civilization that built the lighting system was here long before Rome existed. As they walked deeper underground, she told Marcus her story. She had been a particle physicist at CERN until she discovered that certain experiments were being suppressed because they revealed the true nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. Quantum mechanics already proves that consciousness affects reality at the subatomic level. But we've discovered that trained human consciousness can directly manipulate matter at the macro level. Telekinesis, transmutation, dimensional shifting. It's all real, all reproducible, and all classified at the highest levels. The tunnel opened into a vast underground complex that took Marcus's breath away. It was a city beneath the city, carved from living rock and illuminated by crystalline formations that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. Ancient architecture merged seamlessly with advanced technology. Holographic displays showed star charts that spanned millions of years. Machines hummed with power drawn from sources Marcus couldn't identify. "Welcome to the real Vatican," Dr. Vasquez said. "The one they don't show on tourist maps." She explained that this complex had existed for thousands of years, built by a civilization that understood technology at levels that made modern science look like cave painting. They weren't human, at least not entirely. The Vatican calls them the progenitors. They seeded Earth with both biological life and technological knowledge, then vanished during a cataclysm approximately 12,000 years ago. The evidence was everywhere. Machines that manipulated gravity as easily as turning on a light switch. Computers made from crystalline matrices that could process information at quantum speeds. Energy systems that drew power directly from the dimensional fabric of space-time itself. Medical devices that could regenerate lost limbs, reverse aging, and enhance human cognitive abilities beyond current understanding. The progenitors left behind more than just machines, Dr. Vasquez continued. They left instructions, a complete technological roadmap that could transform humanity into a spacefaring, post-scarcity civilization within a single generation. The Vatican has had access to this information for over 1,000 years. Marcus studied the holographic displays showing star maps with marked worlds, trade routes between solar systems, and what appeared to be construction blueprints for technology that could move faster than light. If they've had this for 1,000 years, why haven't they used it? Dr. Vasquez's laugh was bitter, because the progenitors also left warnings. They described the dangers of advancing too quickly, the civilizations that had destroyed themselves with their own technology. The Vatican interpreted this as a divine mandate to control human development, to ensure that technological advancement happened only under careful supervision. She led him to a chamber filled with historical records spanning millennia. The Church didn't just suppress modern inventions. They've been managing human technological development since the Roman Empire. Every major breakthrough in history was either approved by them or stolen and hidden by them. The Renaissance happened because they decided to release carefully selected knowledge. The Industrial Revolution was allowed because they could control its development through their financial networks. Marcus examined documents that rewrote everything he thought he knew about history. The great library of Alexandria hadn't been destroyed by accident. It had been systematically looted by Vatican agents who moved the most important text to hidden archives. The Dark Ages weren't a period of ignorance. They were a carefully maintained technological regression designed to prevent humanity from rediscovering dangerous knowledge too quickly. But something changed in the 20th century, Dr. Vasquez said. Independent inventors started rediscovering progenitor principles through their own research. Tesla, Reich, dozens of others. The Vatican couldn't control them all, so they shifted to active suppression and elimination. The underground complex contained evidence of this campaign. Files on hundreds of inventors who had been murdered, discredited, or driven insane to protect the suppression protocol. Photographic evidence of technologies that could have transformed civilization, now gathering dust in sealed vaults. Videos of demonstrations showing free energy devices, anti-gravity propulsion, and healing technologies that worked exactly as claimed. The tragedy, Dr. Vasquez explained, is that the progenitors' warnings were about spiritual development, not technological capability. They understood that advanced technology in the hands of emotionally and ethically undeveloped beings was catastrophic. But instead of working to raise human consciousness, the Vatican chose to limit human capability. Marcus realized the scope of the crime being committed against humanity. Every person who had died from diseases that were already curable. Every war fought over resources that were actually abundant. Every environmental crisis that continued while clean technology sat locked away. Centuries of unnecessary suffering maintained to preserve the power structures of a few organizations that had appointed themselves guardians of human destiny. But Dr. Vasquez had more to show him. In the deepest chambers of the complex, she revealed the Vatican's most closely guarded secret. They were preparing for something. Recent excavations had uncovered progenitor warnings about a returning cycle, an event that would test whether humanity was ready to inherit their full technological legacy. The Custodes Silenti aren't just protecting old secrets, she said. They're preparing for a revelation that could either elevate humanity to unimaginable heights or destroy civilization entirely. And according to the progenitor calculations, that moment is approaching faster than anyone realizes. Dr. Vasquez led Marcus deeper into the progenitor complex, past chambers filled with technology that seemed to respond to their presence. Lights brightened as they approached, holographic displays activated when they looked at them, and doorways opened before they reached them. It was as if the entire facility was alive, aware, and welcoming them home. The first thing you must understand about progenitor technology, Dr. Vasquez explained as they entered a circular chamber dominated by a crystalline structure the size of a small building, is that it doesn't operate on mechanical principles. It operates on consciousness principles. Every device, every system, every tool they created requires a conscious interface to function. Marcus approached the crystal formation, feeling an odd resonance in his chest, as if his heartbeat was synchronizing with the pulsing light within the structure. What does that mean, exactly? It means that consciousness isn't just an observer of reality. It's an active participant in creating reality. The progenitors understood what our quantum physicists are just beginning to discover, that the universe is fundamentally mental, not material. Matter is condensed consciousness. Energy is consciousness in motion, and space-time itself is consciousness organized into patterns. She gestured to the crystal, which began to emit a harmonious tone as Marcus drew closer. This is a consciousness amplification matrix. It takes human thought patterns and translates them into direct physical effects. In simple terms, it allows trained minds to reshape reality through focused intention. The progenitors used networks of these matrices to build their civilization, terraform planets, and travel between star systems. Marcus felt a strange sensation as the crystal's resonance intensified. Images began forming in his mind, not his own memories, but something else. He saw vast cities floating in the clouds of gas giant planets, held aloft by the collective consciousness of their inhabitants. He witnessed the construction of impossible structures, massive engineering projects completed through the focused will of beings who understood that thought and matter were different expressions of the same fundamental force. "You're accessing the Akashic interface," Dr. Vasquez said, monitoring readings on a device that looked like it was grown rather than built. The progenitors stored their entire cultural and technological database in quantum crystalline matrices. When a conscious mind interfaces with their technology, it gains access to their knowledge. The visions continued. Marcus saw the progenitors themselves, tall, luminous beings who seemed to exist partially in this dimension and partially in others. They weren't entirely physical, as humans understand physicality. They were consciousness beings who could manifest matter as needed, but whose true existence transcended material form. They came to Earth not as conquerors, but as gardeners, Dr. Vasquez explained. They seeded worlds throughout the galaxy with life forms capable of evolving consciousness, then guided those species through their development until they were ready to join the galactic community. Earth was one of many such projects. Marcus watched through the yield crystal interface as the progenitors worked with early human civilizations. They taught the principles of consciousness-based technology, showed how to build structures that could last millennia, and provided the knowledge necessary for humans to eventually transcend their physical limitations. But something went wrong. The cataclysm, Dr. Vasquez said, reading his thoughts through the neural interface the crystal had established between them. 12,000 years ago, a faction of humans decided they wanted to use progenitor technology for domination rather than evolution. They attempted to weaponize consciousness itself to create systems that would allow them to control other minds on a planetary scale. The visions showed the result. Massive psychic storms that tore through the dimensional fabric of space-time. Entire continents sinking beneath tsunamis generated by the uncontrolled release of consciousness energy. Civilizations that had taken millennia to build were destroyed in a matter of days. The progenitors were forced to evacuate, sealing their most dangerous technologies behind barriers that could only be opened by beings who had achieved sufficient ethical and spiritual development. The survivors of that cataclysm became the foundations of what we call ancient civilizations, Dr. Vasquez continued. Egypt, Sumeria, the Indus Valley, Atlantis, they were all founded by humans who retained fragments of progenitor knowledge. But over time, that knowledge became corrupted, turned into religious dogma, or lost entirely. Marcus saw how certain bloodlines had maintained access to progenitor technology through the centuries. The builders of the pyramids, the architects of ancient temples, the founders of mystery schools, they all possessed fragments of consciousness-based science. But they were always opposed by groups who preferred to rule through scarcity and ignorance rather than abundance and enlightenment. Vatican wasn't originally part of the suppression network, Dr. Vasquez revealed. Early Christianity actually preserved many progenitor teachings. Jesus himself was trained in consciousness manipulation techniques. That's how he performed what people called miracles. Walking on water, healing the sick, multiplying food, even resurrection. These were all applications of consciousness-based technology. The crystal interface showed Marcus scenes from the life of a figure he recognized as Jesus, but not the Jesus of Sunday school stories. This was a man trained in the deepest secrets of consciousness science, capable of manipulating matter and energy through focused intention. His teachings about the kingdom of heaven being within weren't metaphors. They were technical instructions for accessing the consciousness states that made progenitor technology functional. But after the Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D., the Church made a deliberate choice to suppress the technical aspects of Jesus' teachings and emphasize only the religious elements. They transformed consciousness science into faith-based doctrine, making miracles dependent on divine intervention rather than human potential. Marcus watched the systematic suppression of early Christian texts that contained technical information about consciousness manipulation. The Gnostic Gospels weren't heretical theology, they were user manuals for progenitor technology disguised as spiritual teachings. The Vatican had spent 17 centuries turning science into superstition, keeping humanity dependent on priests instead of empowering individuals to access their own consciousness capabilities. The real crime isn't that they've hidden advanced technology, Dr. Vasquez said as the visions faded and Marcus's awareness returned to the chamber. The real crime is that they've hidden human potential. Every person born on this planet has the natural ability to interface with consciousness-based technology. We're all descendants of the humans the progenitors enhanced. But the suppression protocols have convinced us that we're powerless, that we need external authorities to connect with the divine. She led him to another section of the complex where dozens of humans were working with progenitor devices. These weren't Vatican officials or trained scientists. They were ordinary people, teachers, farmers, students, retirees who had discovered their natural ability to operate consciousness technology. Marcus watched a grandmother from Sicily use focused intention to grow plants to full maturity in minutes. A teenager from Mumbai manipulated light patterns to create art that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. An engineer from Detroit interfaced with a progenitor computer system, downloading technical specifications for devices that could revolutionize every aspect of human civilization. This is what they're afraid of, Dr. Vasquez said. Not that we'll discover their hidden technologies, but that we'll remember our own capabilities. Once humans realize they can directly interface with the fundamental forces of reality through consciousness, all forms of external control become obsolete. But the demonstration was interrupted by alarms echoing through the complex. Red lights bathed the chambers as automated voices announced in multiple languages. Custodes silently breach detected. Initiate containment protocols. All personnel to secured positions. Dr. Vasquez grabbed Marcus's arm. They've found us. The Vatican's most advanced forces are equipped with consciousness suppression technology. They can create neural static that prevents access to higher awareness states. We need to reach the deep archives before they establish a full perimeter. As they ran through corridors filled with panicking researchers, Marcus realized the stakes had just escalated beyond anything he had imagined. This wasn't just about suppressed inventions or hidden history. This was about the fundamental nature of human consciousness and whether humanity would be allowed to evolve to its next level of development. The sound of tactical boots echoed behind them as the Custodes silently advanced through the complex. These weren't just soldiers, They were consciousness assassins, trained to kill not just the body, but the soul's capacity for expanded awareness. And they were getting closer. There's something else you need to understand. Dr. Vasquez panted as they reached a blast door marked with warnings in languages Marcus couldn't identify. The approaching cycle we mentioned? It's not just a test. It's an ultimatum. The progenitors are returning, and they're going to evaluate whether humanity is ready for full technological inheritance or needs to be reset. Again, the blast door sealed behind them, just as Marcus heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons in the corridor. Whatever lay beyond this final barrier, it would determine not just his survival, but the future of human consciousness itself. Beyond the blast door lay a chamber that defied the laws of physics as Marcus understood them. The space was impossibly vast, stretching into darkness that seemed to curve back on itself. Crystalline formations covered every surface, pulsing with data streams that flowed like rivers of light through three-dimensional holographic displays. This was the heart of the progenitor legacy, a quantum archive containing the accumulated knowledge of 1,000,000 worlds. "Welcome to the Akashic Library," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice echoing strangely in the expanded space. "Every thought, every discovery, every moment of consciousness evolution across the galaxy is stored here. The Vatican has had access to this for 8 centuries, but they've used it only to maintain control rather than advance humanity." Marcus stared at data streams showing star maps with hundreds of inhabited worlds, each one marked with symbols indicating their level of consciousness development. Earth was highlighted in red with a warning label that made his blood run cold. Species classification, pending termination. Evaluation cycle, 2024 to 2027. Final review status, critical failure. Probability 97.3%. The progenitors don't just give civilizations unlimited chances, Dr. Vasquez explained, interfacing with one of the crystal terminals. Every species gets exactly 3 consciousness evolution cycles. Earth failed the first cycle 12,000 years ago with the Great Cataclysm. We failed the second cycle during what you call the Dark Ages, when the knowledge was suppressed instead of integrated. This is our final opportunity. The archive revealed the true scope of what humanity was facing. The approaching cycle wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was a deliberate test, administered by the progenitors every few thousand years to determine whether our species had achieved sufficient ethical and spiritual development to inherit advanced consciousness technology. Failure meant planetary reset, selective memory wipes, technological regression, and population reduction to give the species more time to evolve properly. The Vatican knows this, Dr. Vasquez said, accessing files that showed centuries of preparation for the coming evaluation. They've been developing what they call the preservation protocol, a plan to ensure that their organization survives the reset while maintaining control over whatever version of humanity emerges. Afterward, Marcus examined the protocol documents with growing horror. The Vatican had identified approximately 10,000 individuals worldwide who possessed the genetic markers and consciousness capabilities necessary to interface with progenitor technology. These people were being systematically monitored, cataloged, and prepared for either recruitment or elimination, depending on their potential usefulness to Vatican control structures. The consciousness suppression technology used by the Custodi silenti isn't just for enforcement, Dr. Vasquez revealed. It's a testing mechanism. They're identifying humans who can resist neural interference, who maintain access to expanded awareness states even under technological attack. Those individuals represent either the greatest threat or the greatest asset to their post-reset civilization. Plans, the archive showed Marcus, something that made him realize why he had been able to access room X7 so easily. His entry hadn't been accidental, it had been orchestrated. The Vatican had been testing him for months, exposing him to increasingly sensitive information to evaluate his consciousness development level. The unlocked door, the missing security, the convenient access codes, it had all been arranged to see how he would respond to suppressed knowledge. "You're one of the inheritors," Dr. Vasquez said, reading the genetic analysis that appeared on the holographic display. "Your DNA carries markers that indicate direct descent from humans who were enhanced by progenitor technology thousands of years ago. The Vatican has been tracking your bloodline for 7 generations." But Marcus barely heard her. His attention was fixed on a section of the archive labeled Project Omega, the Vatican's ultimate contingency plan. If humanity failed the progenitor evaluation, if the reset protocols activated, the Church intended to use hidden consciousness technology to maintain control over the survivors. They had been building a network of consciousness manipulation satellites, underground command centers, and genetic modification facilities designed to create a post-reset human population that would be biologically incapable of evolving beyond their control. They're not trying to help humanity pass the test, Marcus realized with growing outrage. They want us to fail. A reset serves their purposes perfectly. They get to rebuild civilization according to their specifications, with themselves as permanent rulers over a dumbed-down species that can never again threaten their authority. The archive confirmed his suspicions. Vatican documents discussed the inconvenience of advanced human consciousness, the problems created by independent inventors, and the necessity of maintaining technological dependence to preserve social stability. To them, the progenitor evaluation was an opportunity rather than a crisis, a chance to engineer the perfect enslaved species while eliminating the troublesome elements that kept pushing for human advancement. But there was resistance. The archive contained records of the Custodes Veritatis, the organization Dr. Vasquez represented. They weren't just a small group of Vatican defectors. They were part of a worldwide network of inheritors who had discovered their consciousness capabilities and were working to prepare humanity for the evaluation. Scientists who had independently rediscovered progenitor principles. Artists whose work activated dormant consciousness circuits in human observers. Teachers who were guiding students toward expanded awareness through carefully disguised curricula. The evaluation isn't just about technological capability, Dr. Vasquez explained as alarm sounds echoed distantly through the archives. It's about consciousness integration. The progenitors need to see evidence that humanity has learned to use advanced capabilities responsibly, that we can transcend the domination-submission patterns that led to the previous failures. Marcus found himself accessing deeper levels of the archive, his consciousness expanding as he interfaced directly with progenitor knowledge systems. He saw the evaluation criteria, evidence of planetary cooperation rather than competition, Technology used for consciousness expansion rather than control, and most importantly, the emergence of a critical mass of humans who could maintain ethical behavior even when possessed of godlike capabilities. How many people need to awaken for humanity to pass the test? He asked. According to progenitor calculations, approximately 144,000 humans must achieve stable access to consciousness-based technology while maintaining ethical integrity. Current estimates suggest we have about 12,000 active worldwide. We're running out of time. The archive showed Marcus networks of awakening humans across every continent. Meditation practitioners who had discovered they could manipulate physical matter through focused attention. Engineers who had built free energy devices based on consciousness principles they couldn't explain but somehow understood. Healers who had learned to restructure diseased tissue through biofield manipulation. Artists who created works that activated dormant DNA sequences in viewers, but the Vatican was hunting them all. Project Omega included detailed plans for eliminating or capturing every person who showed signs of consciousness evolution. The Church had concluded that an awakened humanity posed an existential threat to all traditional authority structures, and they were prepared to sabotage the entire species rather than lose their position of control. The sound of energy weapons grew closer as the Custodes silently breached the outer archive defenses. Dr. Vasquez activated emergency protocols that began downloading critical information to secure servers worldwide. Whatever happens to us, the knowledge has to survive. If enough people understand what's really happening, we might still have a chance. Marcus accessed one final section of the archive, the progenitor communication protocols. If humanity was going to be evaluated, maybe it was time to speak directly with the evaluators. The technology existed. It was just a matter of figuring out how to use it before the consciousness assassins arrived. As he began the complex startup sequence for the quantum communication array, Marcus realized he was about to make contact with beings who had transcended physical existence millions of years ago. Beings who would decide within the next few years whether humanity deserved to inherit the stars or needed to be reset back to the Stone Age. The question was whether he could convince them that despite centuries of suppression, manipulation, and artificial limitation, there was still something in the human spirit worth preserving, something that justified one more chance at consciousness. Evolution. A communication array came online just as the blast door behind them began to glow from concentrated energy weapons fire. Marcus had perhaps minutes to make the most important argument in human history. The quantum communication array hummed to life as Marcus placed his hands on the crystalline interface panels. Immediately, his consciousness exploded beyond the confines of his physical body, expanding through dimensions he hadn't known existed. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to contain an ocean in a teacup, but somehow his enhanced neural pathways held firm. Dr. Vasquez monitored his vital signs as energy weapons continued their assault on the blast door behind them. The progenitors exist primarily in what they call the consciousness continuum, she explained, her voice seeming to come from very far away. Physical matter is just one frequency band in their spectrum of existence. To communicate with them, you have to shift your awareness to match their dimensional resonance. Marcus felt his perception stretching across space and time. He could see Earth from impossible angles, observing the planet's consciousness field as it pulsed with the thoughts and emotions of billions of humans. The field was turbulent, chaotic, shot through with patterns of fear, anger, and desperation. But underneath the surface chaos, he detected something else, threads of awakening consciousness forming a delicate network around the globe. Then contact came. The progenitor presence was unlike anything Marcus could have imagined. It wasn't a voice or an image, but a direct transmission of pure knowing that bypassed his senses entirely. Ancient beyond measure, yet completely present. Vast enough to encompass galaxies, yet intimately aware of every detail of his individual experience. Human-consciousness. Designate Marcus. Your-species-approaches-final-evaluation. Threshold. Communication unexpected, but acknowledged. Present your appeal. The mental voice carried undertones of cosmic weariness. How many civilizations had the progenitors guided through consciousness evolution cycles? How many had failed the final test and required reset protocols? Marcus sensed that Earth was just one of thousands of similar projects across the galaxy, most of which had ended in disappointment. Wait, Marcus transmitted back, struggling to organize his thoughts into the multi-dimensional communication format the progenitors used. You need to understand what's been happening here. The suppression isn't natural evolutionary failure. It's been artificially imposed by control, systems that don't represent human potential. Explanation requested. Species-history- indicates consistent pattern of consciousness regression since first failure through the quantum link. Marcus shared everything he had learned. The Vatican suppression protocols, the murdered inventors, the hidden technologies, the systematic destruction of consciousness-expanding knowledge. He showed the progenitors how human, spiritual, and technological development had been artificially constrained by organizations that preferred control over evolution. The response came tinged with something that might have been surprise. Suppression patterns confirmed through quantum archaeology. Initial assumption of natural developmental limitation requires revision. However, evaluation unchanged consciousness threshold still required for inheritance approval. But the threshold calculation was based on natural development rates, Marcus argued. If artificial suppression has been limiting our progress for centuries, shouldn't the criteria be adjusted? Negative. Consciousness evolution must demonstrate to transcend limiting factors species that cannot overcome internal suppression lack resilience for galactic community participation. Marcus felt a chill of despair. The progenitors weren't going to lower the standards just because humanity had been sabotaged. If anything, they saw the suppression as an additional test, proof that humans couldn't maintain consciousness evolution in the face of adversity. But then Dr. Vasquez's voice cut through the quantum interface. Show them the resistance networks. Show them the people who have awakened despite the suppression. Marcus shifted his awareness, accessing the global consciousness field to locate the awakening humans Dr. Vasquez had mentioned. What he found gave him hope. Scattered across every continent were individuals who had independently discovered their consciousness capabilities. They weren't connected through any organization or teaching system. They had each broken through the suppression barriers through their own inner development. He showed the progenitors a meditation teacher in Tibet who had learned to manipulate local weather patterns through focused intention, a physicist in Sao Paulo who had built a functioning free energy device based purely on intuitive understanding of consciousness-matter relationships, a group of artists in Detroit who were creating works that activated dormant DNA sequences in viewers, children in various countries who were being born with natural access to telepathic and telekinetic abilities. Consciousness-emergence-patterns-analyzed. Suppression resistance demonstrates evolutionary resilience. However, critical mass calculations indicate insufficient the species graduation. How much time do we have? Marcus asked. Evaluation window closes earth solar cycle 2027. Current awakened population 12,000 required threshold 144,000. Probability of achievement current point 0.0%. The numbers were devastating. Humanity needed to awaken more than 130,000 additional people within 3 years, while fighting active suppression from the Vatican and other control organizations. It seemed impossible. But then Marcus sensed something else in a progenitor communication, a subtle undertone that suggested they weren't entirely unsympathetic to humanity's situation. "You've been through this before, haven't you?" He realized. Your own species faced similar suppression during your consciousness evolution. Affirmative. Progenitor development required transcendence of control hierarchies that preferred limitation to advancement experience provides understanding but cannot justify standard the double quotes. Then help us, Marcus pleaded. Not by changing the standards, but by giving us tools to overcome the suppression more effectively. The pause that followed seemed to stretch across eons. Marcus could sense the progenitor consciousness, consulting with others of their kind, accessing databases that contained the evolutionary histories of millions of species across countless worlds. Intervention protocols typically prohibited. However, artificial suppression represents external interference with natural development patterns. Compensation evaluation evameters. Marcus felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by the sound of the blast door finally giving way. The distinctive energy signatures of Custodi's silent weapons filled the archive chamber as Vatican forces poured through the breach. Contact ending, Dr. Vasquez shouted over the sound of quantum alarms. They're using consciousness suppression fields. The interface won't hold much longer. Compensation transmitted, use wisely. Evaluation continues as scheduled. just before the connection severed, Marcus felt a massive download of information flooding into his consciousness. Not technical specifications or operational manuals, but something far more valuable: activation keys for dormant consciousness capabilities in human DNA, genetic triggers that could awaken latent abilities. And anyone with progenitor-enhanced bloodlines, the quantum communication array went dark as suppression fields overwhelmed the crystalline matrix. Marcus collapsed, his consciousness snapping back into his physical body like a rubber band. But the information was still there, encoded in his neural pathways, ready for transmission to the global resistance network. Dr. Vasquez helped him to his feet as armed figures in advanced tactical gear surrounded them. The Custodes Silenti had arrived, their weapons trained not just on their bodies, but on their consciousness itself. Marcus could feel the neural static they were projecting, designed to prevent access to expanded awareness states. But the progenitor gift had changed him. The consciousness suppression technology that should have overwhelmed his mental faculties was instead revealing its operational patterns to him. He could see the electromagnetic frequencies they were using, understand the neural pathways they were targeting, and most importantly, he could sense ways to counteract their effects. Dr. Whitfield, the lead operative, spoke through a voice modulator that stripped all emotion from his words. You have accessed classified information belonging to the Holy See. Surrender the data and submit to memory restructuring, or face permanent consciousness termination. Marcus looked at Dr. Vasquez, then at the armed figures surrounding them. In his mind, he carried the keys to awakening over 130,000 humans within the next 3 years. The future of human consciousness evolution literally depended on what happened in the next few minutes, but he also carried something else now, the knowledge that the progenitors were not indifferent judges, but former rebels who had once faced their own consciousness suppressors. They wanted humanity to succeed. They had given him tools to make that success possible. The question was whether he could use those tools before the Vatican's consciousness assassins erased not just his memories, but his soul's capacity for evolution. The moment the lead operative finished his ultimatum, Marcus felt the progenitor knowledge activate within his neural pathways. The consciousness suppression field that should have overwhelmed his mind instead became as visible to him as a spider's web, highlighted by morning dew. He could see the electromagnetic patterns, trace the neural interference waves, and most crucially, identify the quantum frequency gaps where human consciousness could slip through. Undetected. Double quotes Dr. Vasquez, he whispered, his voice carrying harmonic undertones that bypassed the audio suppression systems. The activation sequences. Can you access the global network? She nodded, her fingers finding hidden controls on what appeared to be a simple research tablet. The device was actually a quantum communication relay, designed to interface with awakened consciousness nodes worldwide. As the Custodes Silenti prepared their memory restructuring equipment, Dr. Vasquez began transmitting the genetic activation keys Marcus had received from the progenitors. The effect was immediate and global. In a meditation center in Dharamshala, a Tibetan monk felt ancient circuits in his DNA suddenly come online. His consciousness expanded beyond his physical body, allowing him to perceive the quantum substrate underlying material reality. Without understanding how he knew, he began teaching students to manipulate matter through focused intention. In São Paulo, the physicist who had been struggling with free energy equations suddenly understood the missing variables. The activation keys revealed that consciousness itself was the fundamental force that organized quantum fluctuations into stable patterns. His prototype device, previously only 30% efficient, began producing unlimited clean energy. In Detroit, the artists working on consciousness-activating installations felt their creative abilities explode beyond anything they had imagined possible. Their next exhibition would inadvertently awaken latent abilities in thousands of visitors, creating a cascade of consciousness expansion throughout the American Midwest. Children born with natural psychic abilities but taught to suppress them suddenly found those capabilities, returning stronger than ever. A global network of awakened humans began growing exponentially as each newly activated individual sparked awareness in others through simple proximity and interaction. But the Vatican was ready for this scenario. Initiate Protocol Terminus, the lead operative commanded. Immediately, consciousness suppression satellites hidden throughout Earth's orbital infrastructure began broadcasting neural static on frequencies designed to prevent human consciousness from accessing expanded awareness states. The suppression field wasn't localized to the archive chamber. It was planetary in scope. Marcus felt the crushing weight of artificial limitation descending on human consciousness everywhere. The awakening process that had begun moments earlier started to falter as billions of minds were forcibly constrained to baseline awareness levels. But the progenitor gifts had given him more than just activation keys. They had provided countermeasures. The satellites are using our own magnetosphere against us, he realized, accessing knowledge that hadn't existed in his consciousness minutes earlier. But human consciousness operates on quantum frequencies that can tunnel through electromagnetic barriers if properly organized. Working through the quantum relay, Marcus began coordinating with awakened humans worldwide to create what the progenitors called a consciousness resonance web. Individual minds that had achieved expanded awareness could link together, creating a collective field strong enough to overwhelm the suppression satellites. The process required precise timing and absolute trust among participants who might never have met each other physically. The custodes silently realized what was happening and moved to stop him. But Marcus had learned something crucial about their consciousness suppression technology. It was based on progenitor principles that had been reversed and weaponized. Instead of expanding awareness, it contracted it. Instead of connecting consciousness to the quantum field, it severed the connection. But because it used the same underlying mechanisms, it could be hijacked by someone who understood the original principles. As the lead operative activated the memory restructuring device, Marcus reached out through his expanded consciousness and began reprogramming the suppression field generators. Instead of constraining human awareness, he turned them into amplification nodes. The technology designed to keep humanity ignorant became the mechanism for planetary awakening. The effect was beyond anything the resistance movement had hoped to achieve. Across Earth, millions of humans simultaneously felt their consciousness expand beyond the artificial limitations that had been imposed for centuries. The genetic markers that indicated progenitor enhancement existed in far more bloodlines than anyone had realized, the result of thousands of years of interbreeding since the original enhancements. In corporate boardrooms, executives suddenly understood the true environmental and social costs of their decisions and began implementing radical changes. In government offices, politicians felt the interconnectedness of all human experience and started dismantling systems based on division and scarcity. In research laboratories, scientists gained intuitive access to principles that allowed breakthrough discoveries in clean energy, consciousness studies, and healing technologies. But most importantly, ordinary people everywhere began remembering abilities they had always possessed but been taught to forget. Mothers healing their children through focused love found that the healing was literal, not just emotional. Artists creating works that moved viewers to tears discovered they were actually activating dormant emotional and spiritual capacities. Teachers inspiring students realized they were literally transmitting knowledge through consciousness, fields that existed beyond spoken language. Vatican's worst nightmare was coming true. Humanity was remembering what it really was. Dr. Vasquez monitored the global awakening through her quantum relay, tears streaming down her face as she watched consciousness expansion cascading through human populations faster than any suppression system could contain. Current count approaching 47,000 awakened individuals and accelerating, she reported. The resonance web is creating spontaneous activation in people with no previous exposure to consciousness techniques. But the custody silently weren't finished. The lead operative activated an emergency protocol that Marcus recognized from the deepest Vatican files: direct consciousness termination. Instead of just suppressing expanded awareness, the system would attempt to destroy the neural pathways that made consciousness evolution possible. Anyone currently in an expanded state would suffer permanent brain damage or death. They're willing to lobotomize half the planet rather than lose control, Marcus realized with horror. The termination wave began building in the orbital satellites, preparing to broadcast a neural destruction frequency that would damage the consciousness capabilities of every human within range. The Vatican had apparently decided that a brain-damaged but controllable population was preferable to an awakened but independent one. But Marcus had one final card to play. The progenitor knowledge included defensive protocols, methods for protecting consciousness during hostile neural attacks. Working through the resonance web, he began teaching the rapidly expanding network of awakened humans how to shield themselves and others from consciousness termination waves. The process was like trying to perform brain surgery while skydiving, but it was working. Protected nodes of awakened consciousness were spreading faster than the termination protocols could target them. Each shielded individual became a protection generator for others nearby, creating expanding bubbles of safety within the neural attack zones. Termination wave launches in 30 seconds, Dr. Vasquez announced, monitoring the satellite systems. Current protected population approximately 91,000. Still insufficient coverage for global protection. Marcus made a decision that would either save humanity or destroy him completely. Instead of just teaching defensive protocols, he opened his own consciousness as a planetary shield. Using his enhanced neural pathways as a transmission antenna, he began broadcasting the protection frequencies to every human on Earth simultaneously. The strain was enormous. His consciousness stretched across continents, touching billions of minds, creating neural shields faster than the termination wave could penetrate them. Blood began flowing from his eyes and nose as his brain operated far beyond normal human limits, but it was working. As the consciousness termination wave struck Earth's atmosphere, it encountered not vulnerable minds, but a planet-wide network of protected consciousness nodes. The neural destruction frequencies that should have lobotomized millions instead reflected harmlessly off quantum shields maintained by an awakened human species. The last thing Marcus remembered before collapsing was a sensation of cosmic laughter, the progenitors, watching humanity turn the Vatican's own weapons against them, using consciousness suppression technology to create consciousness liberation. Instead, when he regained awareness hours later, Dr. Vasquez was smiling as she showed him the global statistics. 167,000 humans had achieved stable, expanded consciousness access. The critical threshold had not only been reached, but exceeded in a single day. Humanity had passed the evaluation. The question now was what they would do with their inheritance. 6 months after what historians would later call the Great Awakening, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the first consciousness-powered research station, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath him. The facility existed in stable orbit without rockets or fuel, held aloft by the collective focused intention of 12 awakened humans, working in harmonic resonance. It was impossible by the physics he had studied in university, yet as routine as breathing in the new world humanity was building. The transformation had been more rapid and complete than anyone had anticipated. Once the critical threshold of awakened humans was reached, consciousness expansion had become a cascading phenomenon that spread through human populations like wildfire. Children born after the Great Awakening emerged with natural access to abilities that previous generations had considered supernatural. Healing through focused intention, telepathic communication, direct interface with technology through consciousness fields. What had once been rare gifts became normal human capabilities, but the changes went far deeper than individual abilities. The fundamental structures of human civilization were reshaping themselves as awakened minds naturally gravitated toward cooperation instead of competition, abundance instead of scarcity, and exploration instead of exploitation. The global economy had transformed overnight when free energy technology became available to everyone. The Tesla devices, Rife frequency generators, and other suppressed inventions were mass-produced and distributed freely through consciousness-coordinated manufacturing networks. Poverty became impossible when energy, food production, and basic materials could be generated through consciousness matter interaction techniques that required no external resources. Political systems evolved as awakened humans naturally organized themselves into cooperative networks based on consensus and mutual benefit, rather than domination and control. Representative democracy became obsolete when populations could communicate directly through consciousness fields, making collective decision-making instantaneous and perfectly informed. But perhaps the most profound change was in humanity's relationship with the planet itself. Awakened consciousness could perceive the Earth as a living system, feeling directly the health of forests, oceans, and atmospheric systems. Environmental restoration became a global priority not through laws or regulations, but because every awakened human felt personally connected to the planet's well-being. Marcus examined reports from restoration projects worldwide. Deserts were becoming fertile through consciousness-directed weather modification. Polluted rivers were being cleaned through biofield manipulation that accelerated natural purification processes. Extinct species were being brought back through genetic reconstruction, guided by consciousness interfaces that could access evolutionary information stored in quantum field structures. The Vatican, meanwhile, had ceased to exist as a functional organization. When the consciousness suppression satellites were reprogrammed into awakening amplifiers, the shock had rippled through every level of the church hierarchy. Cardinals who had spent their lives enforcing ignorance suddenly found themselves experiencing the expanded awareness they had feared and fought against for centuries. Most had undergone what could only be described as spiritual transformation. Confronted with direct experience of the consciousness principles that Jesus himself had taught, they abandoned the power structures that had perverted his message into an instrument of control. The Vatican's secret archives were opened completely, revealing the full scope of suppressed knowledge to researchers worldwide. A few hardliners had attempted to maintain the old systems, but consciousness suppression technology simply didn't work on awakened populations. The neural static that had once constrained human awareness was as ineffective against evolved consciousness as trying to stop the ocean with a screen door. The Custodes Silenti had disbanded after their consciousness termination attack failed. Many of the former operatives were undergoing rehabilitation, learning to integrate the expanded awareness they had spent their careers trying to destroy in others. The psychological damage from years of consciousness suppression was severe, but awakened healers were developing therapeutic techniques that could repair even deliberately damaged neural pathways. Dr. Vasquez joined Marcus on the observation deck, carrying a quantum communication device that still made his head spin when he tried to understand its operating principles. "The progenitors have confirmed our final evaluation results," she announced. "Humanity has not only passed the consciousness evolution test but exceeded all performance benchmarks. We're being invited to join the galactic consciousness collective." The invitation itself was transmitted directly into their awareness, not words or images, but pure knowing that bypassed all sensory limitations. The galaxy teemed with conscious civilizations, thousands of species that had successfully navigated the transition from material technology to consciousness-based reality manipulation. Earth would be welcomed into a community of beings who had transcended the limitations that once seemed absolute. Trade relationships with other worlds were already being established through consciousness-mediated communication networks that operated faster than light. Information exchange was happening at scales and speeds that made the old internet look like smoke signals. Artistic collaborations were emerging between species, separated by hundreds of light years but connected through quantum consciousness. Fields. Medical knowledge from civilizations that had conquered disease and aging millennia ago was freely shared. Engineering techniques from species that built structures spanning entire solar systems were being adapted for Earth's needs. Philosophical and spiritual wisdom from beings who had explored consciousness for millions of years was available to any human willing to expand their awareness enough to receive it. But, perhaps most exciting, were the exploration opportunities. Consciousness-based transportation allowed travel not just between planets, but between dimensions of reality that physical science had never suspected existed. Human explorers were discovering realms where thought became immediate reality, where time flowed in directions that had no names, where the fundamental forces of creation could be experienced directly rather than just theorized about. Marcus accessed his own expanded capabilities, feeling his consciousness stretch across space to observe the construction of humanity's first interstellar colony. The settlement existed in a binary star system 47 light-years from Earth, established by awakened humans who had learned to exist comfortably in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The colonists maintained full consciousness connection with Earth while exploring a world where the laws of physics operated according to principles that seemed magical but were simply expressions of consciousness interacting with more advanced material substrates. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some humans found the rapid expansion of consciousness overwhelming and required careful support to integrate their new abilities without losing psychological stability. Others struggled with the dissolution of social structures they had spent lifetimes learning to navigate. The transition from scarcity-based competition to abundance-based cooperation required fundamental shifts in thinking that some found difficult to achieve. But the resistance networks that had operated in secret for decades were perfectly positioned to help humanity navigate these challenges. Dr. Vasquez and thousands of other awakened teachers were working with newly conscious individuals, providing guidance and support for the integration process. Recovery centers had been established where people could safely explore their expanded capabilities without fear of judgment or exploitation. Most importantly, the awakening had revealed that consciousness evolution was not a destination but an ongoing process. The abilities that seemed miraculous in the first weeks after the Great Awakening were just the beginning of human potential. Further development led to capabilities that transcended individual existence, entirely collective consciousness states where the boundaries between self and other dissolved into unified awareness that could perceive and influence reality at cosmic scales. Marcus felt a familiar presence in his expanded awareness, the progenitor consciousness, that had provided the activation keys during humanity's darkest moment. The communication that followed carried warmth, pride, and something that might have been paternal. Affection.human-consciousness evolution successful beyond projections species demonstrates exceptional resilience and rapid integration capabilities welcome to community full membership authorized double quotes. Thank you. Marcus transmitted back. But I have to ask, how many other species have you guided through this process? Consciousness-evolution-guidance provided to 40-7-1000 6-100-12 species across current galactic cycle human success rate ranks rapid integration despite artificial suppression factors. The number was staggering. Tens of thousands of civilizations had walked the same path humanity was just beginning. Yet somehow that made the achievement feel even more significant. Against all odds, despite centuries of systematic suppression, humanity had not only survived its consciousness evolution test, but excelled at it. As Marcus watched Earth turning below the research station, he thought about all the people who had suffered and died while the solutions to their problems sat locked away in Vatican vaults. The inventors who had been murdered for rediscovering suppressed knowledge. The patients who had died from diseases that were already curable. The generations who had lived in artificial scarcity while abundance was deliberately withheld. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. The awakened humanity they had died to protect was finally free to explore its true potential, to become the cosmic citizens they had always been meant to be. The future stretched ahead, unlimited and bright, filled with possibilities that exceeded even the dreams of those who had fought hardest for human consciousness evolution. The Great Awakening was complete. The real adventure was just beginning.